This Cloud Security In-Depth special is sponsored by Cisco. Welcome to the latest program in the In-Depth series from Fed Gov Today. On this program, we'll look at cloud security in depth. I'm the host of Fed Gov Today, Francis Rose. A 2-volume cloud security playbook is the guiding document now for cloud security in the Defense Department. Civilian agencies are studying that playbook and other best practices for guidance on the latest tools and techniques to secure the clouds they use. On this program, you'll go in depth with movers from government and industry that are driving cloud security results. Leaders from the Army and Cisco are here to discuss what they're doing now, what it means, and what's ahead for cloud security and for government-industry collaboration. We begin with Carl De Groote, Area Vice President of United States Federal for Cisco. Carl, welcome. It's great to have you on the program. That playbook that I referenced mentions in a number of places multi-cloud environments that are very common in the department, in the Defense Department, and across the civilian agencies. Now, you wrote recently about 2 important components of multi-cloud environments: unified policy and visibility. Let's start with unified policy. What do you mean by that term, and why is that important in a multi-cloud environment?
Sure. So Francis, great to be with you today. And so certainly in the era of AI, leveraging data is super important. It's what feeds machine learning and ultimately decision making. And such, protecting data is paramount to the enterprises that we work with across the federal government. That said, to do that successfully and effectively, you have to have a unified policy and visibility. Unified policy is your governing policy as it relates to the handling of data across multi-cloud environments. So you think about in the world of AI, data is distributed across models, agents, and clouds. And to be able to secure that in a runtime environment is uber hard. So you have to have those governing policies, and you can only govern based on your visibility. So it's important you understand the health of the application, where there are, for data protection and user protection, understand what's going on in the enterprise so that you can react to it real time. Not just for things like data loss, for malicious injects in the world of AI, so models aren't biased in any way or stymied in any way. And then if you think about the agility of the federal government across different missions, whether it be that of national security in the military or administering healthcare or providing entitlements to citizens, that is a very diverse mission base, very agile, and very remote as well across the United States. So you have to be able to provide or effectively enforce those governing policies across those enterprises. So zero trust across users, applications, and environments. So a multi-environment, multi-domain world is what we live in today and what the government operates in. And then 2, it's having an effective unified control capability with your SecOps. So your security ops to support what your mission ops, your ConOps plans are. So those have to be tightly aligned so that the government can run effective missions today.
Are the core components of a unified policy either similar or identical from organization to organization? Are there established best practices for those unified policies, or are there it depends components depending on what's going on in an individual organization?
Right, so that's a great point. So there are obviously best practices. Those are built into stacks, those are built into architectures. From a mission perspective, on an outcome basis, we call it kind of the last mile, depending, if it's multi-domain or if there is a unique mission requirement. So there's always an element that you have to program to. So clouds, by definition, are extensible, so highly programmable. So your policies have to support not just best practices, but also those unique cases as well. That goes back to your SecOps plan, and that goes to, again, protecting data. I could give you a couple examples.
Yeah.
In the AI world, if you think about, what you talked about from the perspective of it doesn't like one rule or policy apply to all. You have to put guide rails in place, especially for AI. And when we talk about data and models being shared or distributed across multiple cloud or multiple agents, managing the behavior of those models is very important. So how do you put guide rails around that, and how do you enforce security in a very distributed environment? So if you think about the network security stack, how do you distribute that? So you have to put that in front of every microcontainer across the enterprise so that you're executing it time mission is performed or time your operations are performed anytime, anywhere.
All right, quick final thought for this part of our conversation, Carl. Another item that you wrote about is use the word secure and seamless access and user protection.
Yes.
How does seamless work in a multi-cloud environment when you have data moving from cloud to cloud that may be hosted by different providers, different locations, and so on?
Yeah, so great question. So if you think about it, in a multi-environment or multi-cloud world where there's good adoption, right? Identity and access becomes more complex. So what Cisco focuses on is the user and app connection as well as the app-to-app connection, securing those, right? Using strong identity-based controls with user protection built in. So it's again, protecting against malicious injects into models, malware, phishing, not just data loss, but data protection as well.
All right, Carl, you hold here. We're going to continue in a moment, and then you'll meet the Chief Technology Officer of the Army, Gabe Chiulli, when Cloud Security in Depth continues in a moment. Welcome back to Cloud Security in Depth. The Army's Enterprise Cloud Management Office lists 6 priorities that shape its mission. The first one is to, quote, deliver secure cloud services to the Army. Joining the conversation on Cloud Security in Depth is Gabe Chiulli. He's Chief Technology Officer for the Army. Gabe, welcome. Carl, welcome back. Gabe, where are you in the Army on cloud and security? What's the intersection of those two things look like for you and your team?
Yeah, so cloud security is obviously, we look at cloud security, right? And you have to kind of look at it in the sense of how do you do cloud security while ensuring lethality, right? The Army's big thing. I'm wearing camo today, right? Because
yes.
I'm trying to represent we're a fully focused on mission entity. When cloud security, when we're looking at it, is an evolution. It's not a day one. It's not a go buy an activity and be fixed. It's all about how do we evolve and make it, more secure over time, along with building out a evolution that ensures our warfighters have access to the most technology and the most data at any given point, but also doing that across all of our various cloud areas. What
it sounds like you're getting at is the idea that since mission will be first, and since the point of what you're doing is not to deliver a technology solution, is to deliver capability to warfighters, sounds like that's where your focus is. Is that a fair read on my part?
Absolutely, yeah. I think I'd say like 75% of our time is really actually going out to the end customers and spending time to figure out what their requirements are and trying to detail out really where are our blockers. I kind of say I look at blockers from a technical perspective and a policy perspective.
Where have you come from? What was the original posture when the Army first got into the cloud business and versus where you are today, and what's that evolution been like?
It's like the Army's Spider-Man origin story, right? So the Army started in the cloud very early, and a lot of that early time of doing cloud was focused on just getting some of our data centers shut down and not having to do lifecycle management. My background, I came from the Army Intel community, and there's different drivers between what Army Intel Cloud has for security versus what we have in the Title 10 non-Intel cloud areas. But generally speaking, it's getting to a more efficient baseline, a more secure baseline, a more repeatable activities of that nature. So when we first joined into, not really joined, but when we first started our cloud journey on the Title 10 side, we started looking around and saying, hey, we understand that we took a large set of programs, put them in the cloud very fast. It wasn't super efficient in the way. And now what we're looking at is how do we make that cloud holistic pattern, how do we make that a lot more efficient for the Army from a cost perspective, from a security perspective, and from a lethality perspective?
Carl, what's your sense of what is unique about the Army's mission based on what Gabe just laid out there versus what's similar to what you've seen in other organizations?
Yeah, sure. I think Gabe certainly covered it as lethality, right? You think about the outcome and that from a technology perspective, Gabe and team are delivering to their end user. So inherent to that is security, right? Data in motion. And if you think about decision advantage in the military, that comes from how fast you can collect data, convert it into information, and then act on it. So with that, there are some inherent challenges that don't necessarily exist in the commercial world. Certainly, given that problem set, we work very closely to ensure that they have the platforms and they're capable of supporting the policies that they lay down in a multi-cloud, more so a multi-domain environment that the military operates in today.
Hey, Gabe, one of the most important things the Army's undertaken in recent years is a modernization journey. How does that match up with what you're doing security-wise? You're changing out technology, I imagine. At the same time, you need to keep the information flow going, and you need to keep that information flow as secure as technologically possible. What's that dynamic look like?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting, right? So we started with, no joke, I got a phone call one day from the Army CIO, and he said, Gabe, we want to reestablish what we think about when we say cloud, right? And that discussion was about rebuilding. It wasn't about, a little bit's about adapting what we had, but it's really rethinking. It's sometimes better to really look at the problem set holistically and say, okay, maybe it's better to start a little from scratch in some areas and really reapproach this with what technology is available. Technology that was available in 2018, not today, right? So we did a complete, what I'll call a pause on our cloud, and now we're looking at it from a digital modernization strategy, right? And that digital modernization strategy includes everything from AI to how we do security of our multi-cloud, which is really important, right? Because it's not just one vendor out there. It is a lot of different vendors, a lot of different clouds to integrate on-premise, warfighting locations. The Army's a big, big monster. So looking at this from the Army's kind of a hyper provider of IT services to the global enterprise, right? So how do we do that in a more efficient manner? And it really took rebuilding and relooking at our infrastructure as a whole, coming up with that right service catalog that addresses all the different needs, not for today, but really 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
What do you advise people both on the defense side and the civilian side to think about, to pay attention to stay ahead of the curve, Carl, to make sure that they are thinking about what we're building is going to be good for us 5 years from now and not just be good today? Oh,
absolutely. Great question. So if you think about those foundational building blocks, one, they're built on standards, and two, they're highly extensible, right? So you can meld them to meet the unique capabilities of the mission. That said, you've got to be able to secure across multi-cloud or multi-environment domains. And that said, you think about the platforms that you employ. They're like for cloud and AI in particular, there's not one central vulnerability database. So you've got to be able to deploy behavioral governance that supports your policy on data information sharing and data use. So again, foundational building blocks that support policy, that are extensible and changeable, programmable, if you will.
You mentioned AI in the first part of the program, Carl, and now just a moment ago. How has that changed the game regarding cloud security? How has that made the way that Gabe and his colleagues and peers think about cloud security? How has it made that different?
Yeah, so AI by nature is highly unpredictable, right? Because if you think about it from a behavioral perspective, and then even from you think about the LLMs, how they're distributed. So to govern it is really hard. So that's why putting those guide rails in place, being able to enforce policy in a runtime environment across multiple clouds is really important.
Gabe, you talked about going out to the end users and talking to them about the capabilities that they need, and I doubt anyone ever said, boy, I'm glad you're doing this or that to make the cloud secure. I don't think that's probably realistic, but what did you learn? What have you learned from those end users at the edge, in the field, whatever, that makes you say we should do this or that differently, or we should think about this or that as we're improving the infrastructure that we have?
It's a great question. I think it's multifold, right? So on one side, it's understanding where I would say complaints. What do our tickets look like that are really like driving complaints and feedback that looks negative, right? So that negative feedback is really what drives us to say, okay, at one point the Army had what I'll call multiple cloud or multi-cloud, which was, individual silos of cloud. And we realized not really long time ago, but a little bit of time ago that, hey, we had to really get to a multiple cloud environment where there's actually a shared infrastructure, treated as one big cloud called the Army cloud, right? Mm-hmm. And that experience really drives what I'll call the full effect that we have complete total understanding of our dependencies, what things that we can control, and ensuring that we can continue to drive capability to the end user. So when we talk to the tactical users, their feedback is, hey, every Tuesday we have an outage at some frequency, and then we go around and we're like, hey, there's a server somewhere. There's a dependency server that gets updated every Tuesday. We probably need to get rid of that one server or figure out how to fix that enterprise capability, right? So looking at that type of situation and looking at those different units in different areas, it really helped drive us to a really good end state where we flattened our network, right? So when we look at flat line in the network, it really helped us understand we now know every single object inside of our environment. And then slowly it starts saying, okay, now we have a fix on the identity. So we get from identity, and what kind of happens in between all this is we get to a zero trust architecture, right? Mm-hmm. You start satisfying those things naturally.
You have an interesting place on the spectrum, because you are not just the Army, you certainly are that, but you are also part of a joint force, and you are sharing information and sharing data, especially in warfighting environments, with other enterprises that you interact with. What kind of a wrinkle does that throw into the concept of cloud security for you?
It's a fun one. I think I am in a very unique spot of understanding it a little better than some folks, just because I came from the Intel community, where that is the biggest driver, is sharing of data and helping out. And not saying that that's not a big thing on the big Army side, but it just has happened for a long time in the Intel community. So coming down from the Intel community to the the Title 10 side, one of the areas that was really interesting is trying to just figure out where there was just policy gaps that were, I'll just say, inherent blockers that we just didn't know existed. So, okay, we saw we can do it on the Intel side, so what is the piece of paper that says we can't do it on the other side? And a lot of times it was just, I'll just say, historic. Someone said it at some point that you couldn't do it. Maybe there was a server somewhere, like I said. It was just blocking that access. So a lot of it is understanding what the warfighter wants and driving to that end state where we get them that capability, that data set, that sharing agreement, driving MOAs, driving MOUs with the different sharing, with the different organizations. Because as you said, our Army's getting called up for various missions across the globe, and it usually is a joint warfighting experience.
So I go back to the first part of the program, Carl, and the conversation that we had about unified policy now makes so much more sense based on what he's talking about. Is that the connection that you were getting at in that part of the program about why that's so important in the event that an organization needs to interact with other organizations and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's preserving data security across domains based on your access rights and that are tied to your identity and your role, right? So very simply, to be able to enforce that across the vast enterprise that's multi-domain, multi-environment, multi-cloud is difficult but achievable. Mm-hmm. And you've got to break down that stack and put it in front of every microservice, every container where applications live, interact with users, interact with other applications, so that you can execute policy across your enterprise.
As time goes on, Carl, and organizations like the Army and others express more and more interest in using applications off the shelf and in exchanging data with each other, what's the implication for security in those kinds of developments?
Yeah, sure. So when we look at, or we spin up our platforms in an R&D effort, well, we certainly have commercial and large commercial enterprises in mind. If we start with the advanced requirements of the federal government, in particular our military, we embed those in our commercial offerings. So again, easier, to get to capability and help our federal customers get there faster.
You talked about looking at technology, Gabe, to understand what you're going to need in 5 years. How do you game for that, considering the rate of speed of change, the need for speed? Every military leader in every service tells me speed, speed, speed is the most important thing. Yep. And then also the speed of the rapidity of the change in the threat landscape. How do you try to figure ahead of what will be useful for you at some future point?
This is actually a favorite topic of mine, and the reason why I say it is one of my key drivers has been sometimes we make ourselves special where we don't need to be, right? So we kind of start creating what I'll call like customized things that we really didn't need to make customized because we're the Army, right? It's a COTS product. Let's treat it like a COTS workflow. When we make things unique is where we add in the burden and the technology gap and the experience gap, and it makes it harder for them to kind of work on our products because we said, hey, Army needs this extra, label on there, and then we go and figure out that label didn't need to exist. It just happened to be someone a while ago used that as a key indicator because of technology at the time. And so some of it's bringing it back to home. How can we get to a more COTS application of the technology stack versus making our stuff very highly tailored to Army needs? And that drives speed, capacity, and throughput for sure for us.
How do you push people or lead people to that decision, Carl, that to help them to understand, yeah, you have a special mission, you don't necessarily need a special capability to be able to drive that mission?
Right, and if we're doing it right, we're anticipating those needs and certainly understanding and getting together with the federal government, Army in particular. So again, leveraging commercial off-the-shelf products is great for us as well, provided we build in those capabilities. So the problem sets that the federal government presents us with are great to model and build those capabilities into our platforms and ultimately our offerings. And really, it's important in operating in a regulated environment as well.
Two connections you talked about in the piece that you wrote that we talked about in the first part of this program. User-to-app connections and app-to-app connections. Why are they important in the kind of environment and the kind of uses that we're talking about today?
Sure, it's highly dynamic. And I remember, years ago, General Goldfein, when he was head of the Joint Chiefs, talked about the human-machine partnership. So if you think about the advancements today, we talk a lot about human capital. There's risk associated there. Now we're talking about digital capital, right? And I think even some of the human capital management companies look at both digital and human, and then they talk about humanoid today. So, understanding the inherent risks that are associated with that and securing environments like that are uber important. Yeah.
How do you navigate that challenge, thinking about the user-to-app and the app-to-app connections?
So I'll say this is kind of a twofold kind of area. I think the first fold is user-to-app is really about figuring out what those identities need to have access to at any given level and tier. I think I kind of drive this to my last statement where I say IP addresses are IP addresses, right? The government didn't have a specific way that we did IP space versus how, commercial world does IP space. So looking at the user experience and how we allow them access to applications, and that's kind of that zero trust level of, okay, we've got access control from just being able to see the app, then you start having cell level security and RBAC and LBAC and different levels of security inside of an application. And then taking that approach and saying, how do you do MPE, certificate exchange with different servers? So a computer does an activity on behalf of another system to exchange information. Opening up kind of that dynamic so that we have that layer of technology to technology kind of, I'll call it discussion between systems, right? That is extremely important and probably one of the more core areas of how you actually are able to reinforce network security. Now you have computer has a lock as an MPE. That computer is able to kind of certify through the network that it's a known activity and it's gathering data for its end customer from a known kind of exchange of information.
We haven't talked about the term resilience so far, but it sounds like that's an important component of of a resilient network. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, a resilient network too. I think there's kind of two parts of resilient network, right? You've got we want to make sure that things online, and that online portion, it's making sure we're load balanced, and we have enough network connectivity to ensure, like, hey, we hit 10 people, that's all we can afford for the month. That doesn't want to be the experience you want to give your users, right? So you got that experience, or that threshold of what type of networking. Then you have the threshold of how do you enable kind of that network to always have compliant traffic, and when do you really have to have that network go to a place where you call it untrustworthy, right? So how do you keep the traffic as low level into the network, and kind of limit how much scanning and all that kind of traffic that needs to go through those different processes at a higher level, because you're treating it as an outside traffic versus internal trusted traffic.
You've used the term user experience a couple of times, and Carl, I want to get your thoughts on this in a moment too. But how has that concept, I think that's a completely foreign concept in the cybersecurity realm 5 years ago, 10 years ago, nobody talked about it. Now people talk about it all the time. How has that informed the way that you think about the concepts that we're talking about on this show?
Oh, I definitely think the user experience. So I was an enlisted guy in the Army back years and years ago, right? And I can tell you, user experience is more important to me than the actual security sometimes. And I say that in the sense of a user will not use the tool, and they won't use it correctly if the user experience doesn't suit them using the tool. And people will find workarounds to using that tool if you don't make it compatible with their user experience, right? So having a user experience that aligns to their actual need is extremely important, and one of my duties is being an authorizing official, and part of that activity is ensuring that the user experience is going to be suitable to their need.
Mm-hmm. You were nodding pretty enthusiastically as he was talking there, Carl. What resonated about what he said?
The technology has to be transparent to the user. We've got to kind of mask the complexity, and what Gabe has outlined, think about all the complexities back there that he solves for. But the end user has a mission to perform, and the complexity doesn't matter. It's got to be, easily executable. So in that case, like as Gabe architects, right, it's balancing that effectiveness with security and safety, and then the trustworthiness of data.
And the lethality.
And ultimately get to lethality. Yeah.
We have a little bit more than a minute left, and we've talked a lot about where we are. Where are you moving forward to? What do you have in your sights for the next year, 18 months, 2 years, Gabe?
Yeah, I think our big drivers right now are definitely finishing out what we call our future design pattern, and that really is that multiple cloud, real architecture, completely laid out across our cloud providers, and then connecting that stuff up to a hybrid and getting some of those pilots put in place to understand where we want to go in the more future state. The other part is learning on some of our kind of historic issues, where we can really kill off some of that O&M tail and really give all the impact towards operations.
Gabe, thank you very much for joining me. Carl, you too, thanks for being here. And thank you for watching Cloud Security In Depth, sponsored by Cisco. If you missed any part of this program, you can watch the show in its entirety on our website at fedgovtoday.com or the Fed Gov Today YouTube channel. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks for watching. Good night.